Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real, live ghost town. It's true. However, it didn't start that way. Disney built the Treasure Island Resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Then they abandoned it. Officially, Disney blamed the shallow waters. They were too shallow for the boats to navigate. There was even blame cast on the workers. People claimed that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where their story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and obviously it wasn't because of lazy foreigners. Both are convenient excuses. I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Because of Mowgli's Palace. Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina. It was meant to be a jungle-themed resort with a large palace in the center of the whole thing. Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with almost no explanation. The government said that the land was supposedly for a highway. Knowing full well what was going on, people started calling it the Mickey Mouse Highway. Unfortunately, Disney had control. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damn thing anyone could do or say about it. Local news outlets were against the resort at first, but some insane connection between Disney's media holdings and the local venues came into play, and their opinions turned on a dime. Finally, construction was completed. Visitors started coming in, and the surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Treasure Island. Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. They shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think, but they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss seemed hilarious and wonderful to a large group of folks who didn't want the resort in the first place. I hadn't given it a single thought since it was closed all those years ago. I live about 4 hours from Emerald Isle, so I only heard grumblings and didn't experience any of it firsthand. Then I read an article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island Resort and written a blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by disgruntled employees. Hell, the locals probably had a hand in wrecking that place too. People in the Bahamas felt just as angry about Treasure Island as folks did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus, there were rumors that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after that? Well, this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Years had passed since its closing, and I figured it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace. Take some photos, write about my experiences, and see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. But thinking is a lot harder than doing, and it took me another year to get around to Emerald Isle. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the resort. Or rather, I tried to. No official Disney site or resource made any mention of the place. That had been scrubbed clean. Even odder was that, apparently, nobody before myself had thought to blog about it or even post a photo. No local articles or websites had one word about it, though that didn't surprise me. They wouldn't be out there lauding their embarrassment, you know? Recently, however, I learned that corporations can ask companies like Google to remove links from search results, basically for no good reason. Looking back, I wonder if Disney had made sure of their silence. In the end, I could barely find the place. All I had to go on was an ancient map I'd received in the mail back in the 90s. It was a promotional item sent to people who had recently been to Disney World, and I guess they considered 1987 recent. I didn't intend to hang on to it. It just got lost in the shuffle of all the other books and comics from my childhood. I'd only remembered it months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to find the storage bin that my parents had shoved it all into. Locals were no help, as most were transplants who had moved to the beach recently, or old-timers who just sneered at me and made rude gestures the second I managed to ask them about the resort. The drive took me through long stretches of overgrowth. Tropical plants had run rampant and overpopulated the area, but small patches of local flora still peeked through the colorful foliage, like hidden refugees. I was in awe when I reached the entrance to the resort. Tremendous monolithic wooden gates loomed over me. The supports on either side looked like they must have been cut from giant sequoias. The structure had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. A sheet of scrap metal hung from the gate with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney." Clearly the handiwork of a local or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. gates were wide enough to walk through, but not drive, so I grabbed my digital camera and the map and set off on foot. The inner grounds were just as overgrown as the entryway. Palm trees stood untended and ragged among piles of their own coconuts. Banana plants stood in their own stinking, bug-riddled refuse. There was a kind of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted rows of perennial flowers mixed with obnoxious weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. Any buildings that remained were unidentifiable wrecks. What was once an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of debris chopped up by vandalism and ravaged by weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo with a friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen in a jovial wave toward no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin. Bird shit covered whole swaths of his fur and vines ensnared the platform he stood on. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find graffiti covering the places where the original paint hadn't peeled and chipped away. The front doors weren't just open, they'd been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the entrance, someone had once again painted, "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you about all the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless bums, but no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare, that I actually think people had stolen the molding from the walls. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rattle of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem interesting. The kitchen was as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances in space, no expenses spared. Every glass surface broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like old piss. The freezer had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat, and as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, but after letting go, within seconds it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Just like the Treasure Island resort, someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements. There was about half an inch of rancid, stinking water on the floor, so I didn't stay there very long. What's odd is that the toilets and the sinks all dripped, leaked, or just ran freely. It seemed to me that they should have shut the water off long ago. The rooms were a similar story. Dilapidated piles of what once might have been furniture, mildewed carpet coating everything in a horrible stench, and remains of old electronics, probably a television or a radio. Once, as I was wandering through the halls of rooms, I thought I heard a faint whispering nearby. Brief snippets of what sounded like a heated conversation. Weeping. At first I thought it might have been a television that had been left behind, but that didn't make any sense. It was probably my mind playing tricks on me. By the time I made it back to the entrance, I couldn't help but feel disappointed. A year of waiting, research, planning, a 4-hour trip, and for what? A few broken buildings. Then I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had missed, something that would give me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. A lifelike statue of a python, maybe 80 feet long, coiled up and sunning itself, sat on a pedestal right in the center of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light was perfect for a photograph. I approached the snake and snapped a photo. I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the detail of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned, and slithered off the pedestal, across the grass and into the trees. All 80 feet of it. Its head disappeared into the woods long before its tail even left the pedestal. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. The map itself stated that I was standing atop the reptile house. I should have known. I'd read about the sharks at Treasure Isle. I should have known they'd done this. I was utterly stupefied. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back toward the palace. It was gone, but I wasn't taking any chances. I backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to the face to get myself right in the head after that. My legs had turned to jelly at this point, and I looked for a place to sit down. Of course, there was no place to sit down unless I wanted to recline in the broken glass carpet or haul myself up onto a desk of questionable reliability. I'd seen some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go have a seat there until I felt better. After that, I'd be gone. The staircase was far enough from the front of the building to be relatively clean, save for a startling accumulation of dust. I pulled a wedge of metal off of the wall, which was painted with the "Abandoned by Disney" motto I'd become accustomed to. placed the wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward, below ground level. I'd never investigated to see what was down there, and curiosity got the best of me. Using my camera flash as an improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase ended in a metal door with a padlock. A sign on the door read, "Mascots only, thank you." This perked up my spirits a little bit, for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would definitely have some interesting stuff. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. Not the vandals, not the looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and maybe find something interesting to photograph or steal. I came to the palace agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the plate enough to pull the screws out, something nobody else had been able to do at the time, apparently. The mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building. For one, every second or third light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were taking their toll. Tables had notepads and pens, there were clocks, even a time punch clock on the wall, complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered here and there, and I even found a small break room with an old television and rotten food and drink on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalyptic movies where everything is left in the state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like hallways of the mascots-only area, the sights became more and more interesting. Desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost melded with the damp floor, and a large carpet of mold was slowly overtaking the real crimson floor covering. Everything was sort of squishy. Anything wooden disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force, and clothing hanging on hooks in one of the rooms fell to moist threads when I tried to unhook them. The light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of the place. Eventually, I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words Character Prep 1 stenciled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. This was probably where the costumes were kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. Then, as I walked away, there was a slight popping sound, and the door creaked open. Inside, the room was pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch in the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I felt my way around the room, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz. Rows of lights overhead flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out like errant fireflies. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and the lights gained in intensity. It seemed like they were going to keep getting brighter until the bulbs exploded, but just when I thought it would reach that stage, the lights dimmed and steadied. The room was exactly as I'd pictured it. Full-body Disney costumes hung on the walls like strange cartoon cadavers on invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers toward the back. What I found odd was a Mickey Mouse costume at the center of the room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the middle of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten and shedding, leaving bare patches of disintegrating foam. What was even odder, however, was the coloring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse, black where he should be white and white where he should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually put off photographing the thing. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls. High angles, low angles, profile shots showing an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces. Then I decided to stage a shot. I wanted a photo of one of the bedraggled heads on the slick, grimy floor. I reached for the headpiece of a Donald Duck costume and carefully removed it so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. As I looked into the face of the wide-eyed, moldering head, a loud clattering sound made me jump. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me with dead, empty sockets. I dropped the head immediately and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor and a nagging urge took over. I had to take a picture of it, you know? I had to. I'd need proof of what happened. I had no doubt in my mind, right from the start, that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey, that photo-negative, opposite Mickey in the middle of the floor, started to get up. It climbed to its feet, slow, unsteady, like a human just learning to walk. Its limbs flopped to and fro, hanging loosely like a suit of skin. Once it stood steady, the costume, or whatever was inside it, turned and looked at me. Its white, round eyes looked right at me, and it said nothing. The purest feeling of fear I've ever felt in my entire life welled up in my stomach. Synapses fired wildly in my brain, telling me that everything I was looking at was wrong, evil. With shaking hands, a pounding heart, and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The camera's LCD only displayed dead pixels and a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume. As the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the pixels spread, marring the screen wherever Mickey's outline moved. Then the camera went blank, quiet and dead. I looked back up at the Mickey Mouse costume. To my surprise, it waved. Slowly, but with the same enthusiasm as any other costume Mickey at a Disney park. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if it would kill me or if I could even speak to it, so I did the first thing that came to mind. I waved back. The creature simply lifted up a hand with a finger outstretched as if it was telling me to wait. Then it started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements like a wounded man trying to pull himself free of a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, so much blood. Thick, yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. My feet flew. I only cared about getting away. Above the doorway, I saw the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by Disney. I never got the pictures off of the camera. I never blogged about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity, if not for my life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about this place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. They didn't want anything like that getting out.